Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, Urgent, Close Your GenAI Knowledge Gap Before It's Too Late, sponsored by Litmus. Hi, I'm Claude Werder of Brandon Hall Group, and I'll be your moderator today. Please join me in welcoming our two presenters today. We've had a lot of fun putting this together, and I think they've got a lot to share with you today. First is Dr. Jill Stefaniak, who's the Chief Learning Officer at Litmos, and her interests focus on the development of L&D professionals and instructional design decision-making. She also serves as an associate professor in the Learning, Design, and Technology program at the University of Georgia. The content Jill presents today are her opinions and carries no endorsement of the University of Georgia. We're also joined by Tommy Richardson, who's the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Litmos. He's a recognized expert in software as a service, as a business strategist and technology leader. He has over 20 years of experience in roles that include Chief Operating Officer, President, General Manager, Operating Partner, Chief Product Officer, and Chief Technology Officer. And he's worked in multiple industries, from ed tech to healthcare and HR tech. I want to take a few moments to thank our sponsor, Litmos. Litmos develops learning solutions for top-performing companies. An established leader since 2007, Litmos learning solutions include the easiest-to-use LMS, comprehensive learning content collections, integrations with top workflow tools, and services to support success. Thousands of companies trust Litmos learning solutions to deliver instruction and intelligence to employees, customers, and partners. The solutions are used by more than 30 million people in 150 countries across 35 languages. And for more information, you can, of course, go to www.litmos.com. For those of you who aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we're a human capital management research and advisory firm. We empower excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. We have 6 practice areas, including learning and development, talent management, and leadership development. And we also offer several certification programs that are open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist program. You can visit certification.brandonhall.com to learn more about how to earn that designation and others. We want to remind everyone that the annual Brandon Hall Group Excellence Conference is coming up. It's around the corner, January 28th to 30th in South Florida. The registration is now open. And we also invite you, as always, to participate in our research surveys. We're going to show you research related to AI and learning that we've done today. And we have 3 active surveys open now that are at the top of the screen. Links will be available in your handout, or you can always visit brandonhall.com. Finally, a few logistics. To ask questions, please use the questions panel on your control bar, and we'll leave time at the end for questions. We'll probably filter in a few questions as we go as well, along with comments from you. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll share a link to the recording and a PDF of the presentation via email in probably less than 24 hours after the webinar ends. If you'd like to download a copy of today's presentation instantly, the link to do so will be available in the chat shortly. And the chat, of course, is open for today. We really hope you'll share your thoughts and experiences. We'll invite you to do so in a couple of places. But feel free to give your feedback and perspective as we go. So we hope you'll join in the discussion today, share your thoughts, or just pop in, say hello, and let us know where you're coming from today. We'll have a quick raffle at the end of the webinar today. The winner will receive a $100 Amazon gift card, but you do have to be present to win, so make sure you stay on till the end. Today's agenda, we've got a lot to cover. We'll start with kind of the evolution and current state of GenAI in learning. Talk about the potential of AI as we see it, how to mitigate concerns or risks, the path to success for learning teams as they grow into this new era, and key takeaways from our discussion. And then, of course, Q&A at the end. So let's get right into it. I'll start off by talking a little bit about the evolution and current state of GenAI and learning. And I feel like, in a way, a lot of learning organizations have gone through a process that, to me, kind of resembles the stages of grief when it comes to generative AI. The learning community is in a pretty good place now, as we'll show you, and beginning to really take advantage of AI. But it's certainly been a journey over the last year and a half. It started with a pretty strong sense of denial. Our early research survey showed that almost 70% of respondents did not believe generative AI would have any significant impact on L&D. And that was kind of followed by an anger and fear stage, where there was a lot of concern in our interviews we did about learning might be upended, and the fear that jobs and learning would be lost and their careers could be derailed. 59% of respondents to one survey fairly early on said business learning functions would be seriously hurt by generative AI. And then we got into, for lack of a better word, kind of the bargaining phase. Learning professionals began telling us they could see where AI could help with a few things, but they remained fairly adamant that it could cause significant problems in other areas. So they were kind of going back and forth. And some of the problems, could actually be true. There are some risks and things to mitigate, and we're going to be talking about some of those risks and mitigations today. But what's happened in the last few months in particular is basic acceptance. Over the last couple of months, we've really seen a change. And so we did this survey just recently. We're running our HCM Outlook survey. We do this every year, looking at trends for the year ahead. And we asked people what they thought the impact of GenAI in various human capital management functions would be. We asked about all of them. And you can see that learning and development rated the highest impact. 47% of organizations said GenAI would have a high impact. 42% said it would have a moderate impact, for a total of 89% saying there would be significant impact. So that was greater than every other function, considerably greater than many. So Tommy and Jill, what's your reaction to that kind of data?
I mean, it kind of tracks to what I think. I think there's some differences when you kind of look at these categories. So for example, when you think about learning and development, we're fundamentally kind of teaching content. It's very content based, whether that's a book, a PDF, a course, a ILT session. Fundamentally, it's content, it's language. And when you think about generative AI and this iteration of AI that we're all fundamentally talking about, it's called the large language model. And so it's almost like the technology was purposely, intentfully built for L&D, and just all the things you can do with it, that we'll talk about on this webinar, are just such a good fit, when you kind of compare it to, talent management. Not that you can't use AI in talent management, certainly you can. There's companies who are doing it, but I just think not to the extent that
Right.
You can really leverage it well in L&D.
Yeah, and I think too, when we look at these two categories with high impact or moderate impact, there's so much opportunity with AI, well, and particularly with generative AI and L&D, in that we're really just scratching the surface. I think there's a lot of opportunities that we're starting to see where there's definite enhancements to helping us create more efficient training, to expedite different processes that we do in that instructional design process. And so I would expect that as we continue to learn more about generative AI and develop some of these different test cases, we'll continue to see those numbers increase.
Yeah, I agree. And this projected impact, I think, begs a couple of questions. Is the learning function prepared for GenAI's projected impact? Do learning leaders fully understand generative AI and how it can help learning? So I'd like to start things off here with a couple of quick poll questions to get your input and what you're feeling right now. So our first poll question you can weigh in on is how would you rate your current understanding of generative AI? Do you feel you're kind of like at the beginning level, very little, intermediate, something, but you still have a lot to learn, advanced, you feel like you're quite knowledgeable and are in a good place to take advantage of the benefits? Or are you even an expert? You could be on the webinar, you could teach this topic. So we're interested to see where you all are, and then we have a little research to show where the larger learning community is. But this also helps us to get a sense of where you all are, and we can kind of adjust some of our content and some of our comments around where you are. So I think Shay, who's our producer joining us today, is ready to show us. And interesting. So about 87% are at the immediate or intermediate or beginner level, with 55% feeling they still have a lot to learn, and very few people feeling in a good place where they're quite knowledgeable or an expert. So let's see how that compares with our other data. We've done a couple of polls and surveys just over the last month. So this is pretty recent data about the understanding and use of AI. So to the left, you have the graph that talks about the level of understanding of how GenAI can impact learning and development. And you can see that about 53% said they had a basic or marginal understanding, which is fairly close to where we are here today. Only 9% said they had a detailed understanding. We also asked the critical question of how often learning professionals personally use generative AI. And I think we asked that question, and I think it's important because Gen AI is one of those things, unless you've used it, unless you touch it and feel it and play around with different prompts and everything, it's kind of hard to get a feel for what the pros and the cons are and what you can use it for. And it was about a 60-40 split, if you look to the graph on the right, between those who use it rarely or not at all. About 59% use it rarely or not at all. And about, my math skills are failing me here, about 41% say that they use it frequently or occasionally. So that's kind of where we are. So we'd love for you to share some of the ways you may be using generative AI now, maybe put it in the chat as we go along, either in your work or outside of work. And we also have another quick poll question for you before we start digging in. So the question is, how urgent is it for your organization to adopt generative AI for learning in the coming months? Is it not at all urgent, somewhat urgent, or you've already adopted it in meaningful ways so that you've already got a good start? And if you have any comments to add in the chat, we're also would love to hear those. And I'm really interested in it. We haven't asked this question specifically in this way. So given the situation now with AI, it'll be really interesting to see the sense of urgency people are feeling. We have quite a few people signed up and registered for the webinar today, so that tells me maybe there is some sense of urgency, but we'll see here. Shay, let us know when we're ready. Here we go. So interesting. So about 74% say not at all urgent or somewhat urgent. Only 18% say it's urgent, and 9% say they've already adapted it in meaningful ways. So love for you to share some of your thoughts about why it's not urgent, or why it is urgent for those of you who have really feel there's a sense of urgency, to give us some, a good sense of where you're coming from on that. Jill and Tom, any thoughts on any of this poll data before we move on?
I think one of the things, and it kind of goes back to some of the data you showed on the previous screen, in terms of organizations and their level of urgency, we're still relatively in the infancy phase of using generative AI to support L&D. And what that means is that when we're looking at what's the viability of this and how it may impact our metrics and impact our organizations, it's going to take some time. Time is a variable that we can't adjust it. We can't rush that. And I think as we start to see more organizations being able to report on the levels and the degrees of which generative AI is positively impacting their L&D practices, I think we'll continue to see more organizations starting to pay closer attention to it, and we might begin to see have L&D professionals experiencing more conversations from organizations that are willing to start exploring what those possibilities may be. I've been trying to scroll in the chat too.
Yeah, so am I. Yeah.
I'm just excited someone mentioned needs assessment. I was happy to see they were using generative AI to help create those summaries. But I think we're seeing a lot of different ways. I've seen a few things come up with making lists to avoid that blank page syndrome, and just kind of start thinking about what are some of those different possibilities when you're starting to engage in design. And so all these different descriptions that we kind of see popping up are really lending, they're very much strategies to kind of help us improve the efficiency of design. If we think about different L&D design practices that your typical instructional design professional would partake in, there's lots of opportunities either to kind of just improve upon things, enhance things, and kind of help just to get started.
Yeah, thanks for all your comments. This is great. And I think Charlie and a couple of others brought up things that I think I hear quite a bit, and that is contrary to urgency. The use of GenAI is discouraged across my company because of fears of privacy and data security. I also run into a lot of organizations that, on one hand, they discourage it and they have all these privacy data concerns. But at the same time, learning teams feeling pressure to develop things, even though they actually can't use it yet, but they want them to work on it anyway. So there's this push and pull type of thing. So I think there's a lot of mixed messages and a lot of situations, a variety of situations that companies are dealing with. So these are great comments, and keep them coming. So let's move on. I thought we'd show you a little bit of data about where we are with the current use of AI technology to support learning, which kind of ties into some of the comments. So because of some of the people sitting on the sidelines, taking a cautious approach, concerned about security issues, whatever the case may be, relatively few organizations are using it significantly now. The highest use is for personalized learning recommendations, 35%, 34% to generate learning content and courseware, but almost as many, a full third of our polling audience, are not using AI for learning at all. And then you can see there are a lot of, I think, really cool uses that aren't getting nearly as much attention or use, like using it for skill assessments or combining multiple tools and technologies to drive results, or for learning analytics, which it can be very helpful, and we can talk about that later, both after the fact and during learning initiatives. And then implementing AI chatbots or virtual assistants get very little use at this point. Any thoughts before we move on?
I'm a little surprised. Well, I am and I'm not. I'm a little surprised where we see for learning analytics being a little bit lower in terms of people's current use. I think it just kind of goes back to, as we start to see more impact, I think we'll see the use of AI to help support activities involving learning analytics. We'll continue to see that increase. But I also think that we'll begin to start seeing how learning analytics will be leveraged more prominently to support personalized learning. I think we're going to start seeing more L&D professionals, more of our HR departments really using that data and making decisions quickly on what types of additional training may be needed, whether it's for upskilling, providing additional resources for employees on task completions. But I think that we'll continue to see that those two kind of go hand in hand in the next little while.
Yeah, I'm kind of encouraged to see personalized learning, kind of at the top. I kind of view, like most of us in the industry, like that's what we're here to do, is to teach and to get the learners to learn effectively. And I think with the tech that we've kind of had at our disposal, for the past 10, 15 years, it was very difficult to do like true, personalized learning. And when you get back to kind of this new AI iteration is fundamentally based upon language and understanding language and data, it lends itself very well to do things, very simply. Like for example, Litmus just rolled out a feature called an AI playlist for learners. And it's very easy for a learner just to go out there and type to it like it's talking to a human and go, hey, I'm looking for content that looks like this. And, they can characterize it all kinds of ways. I'm an engineering manager and I'm looking for, content around engineering management, and then it just finds that content and brings it back, which, if you tried to do that, 3 or 4 years ago, very difficult thing to do. And so kind of encourage that people are doing that, because, one is focused on learner, which I think is great. But also, it's truly leveraging like what you can only do with AI to make that work.
Yeah, so what's interesting, I think, is the current use, as we've seen, is relatively low. But as I kind of mentioned when I was talking about the evolution, is learning folks are beginning to be more comfortable with AI-generated content, or the idea of AI-generated content in learning. So we did a survey specifically for this webinar, AI and the LMS, and asked about the comfort level. So these are almost like 98% learning people responding to this. And 59% are comfortable or somewhat comfortable. Only 29% somewhat or very uncomfortable, and 12% are kind of sitting on the fence. But I think that bodes well for the future, right? That we've maybe kind of gotten off to a cautious start. There are some barriers that organizations are still working through. But the comfort is increasing. And so I think we've come a long way over the last year or so.
To me, a year is pretty quick. I've been through mainframe to client server switches, client server to web to mobile. Like, all of those took a lot longer, I think, than a year to get to this point. So I think it's going to be very interesting to kind of look at, like, what do these numbers look like a year from now? I think it's going to accelerate, dramatically more.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to be doing questions like this and surveys like this on an ongoing basis to try to keep up with what the trends are. So we talked a lot about the current state and maybe some of the barriers, but let's talk now a little bit about the potential. I think we can agree there is a lot of potential and also some inherent risks. Much of the potential rests with your ability to leverage AI features powered in your LMS. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I'll turn it over to Tommy and Jill to talk from their perspective a little bit of the potential uses of AI.
I think the great thing about AI in the L&D world is there's enough AI to go around for everybody. And so certainly for the instructional designers, there's usages for AI within content creation, to create better content, to speed up generation of content, to help you with ideas, some of the stuff floating on the chat. The learner, like we talked about with personalized learner, making sure the learner is learning what they need to know and not what they don't need to know, which has long been a problem in L&D. AI assistant, another great learning tool. But even these assistants, like, they can be just not kind of a sidekick for learners. If you got a question about a course or something like that, they can actually do work for you. So if you're an admin and you found a course and you want to assign to the team, they can just, I want to assign this course to this team, and it can go do it. And so you've got something there for admins. And then kind of the quality check around accessibility, being able to check the content and make sure that it's accessible, and supporting all those standards, which is important. And so again, I think AI seems like it was sort of made for L&D, and literally, whether you're a learner or a manager or an admin or a content creator, regardless of what your role is, you're likely going to have some positive use, in the tools that you're using in the future.
And I think too, when we look at all of these potential uses of AI and L&D, I'm sure there's going to be so many more in the next couple of years as more and more development and experimentation happens. But with all of these potential uses, we could look at each one of these through two different lenses. We could look at it in terms of, how does this impact the learner? What's the learner's interaction with AI and their L&D experiences? But then we can also look at it in terms of administration, your organization. How is this helping us synthesize through data? How is this helping us come to decisions more quickly, to be able to really pinpoint where we have some of our learners encountering challenges and pain points throughout the way, or perhaps on the job, so we can really start creating some intentional learning content for them to try and mitigate some of those issues. And so I think that's what's exciting about all of this. As we look forward, we can kind of see how there's opportunities to help enhance several different L&D roles within the organization to help support communication across multiple divisions within our organizations, but also how is the learner interacting and experiencing the content. I get excited as an instructional designer and as a researcher when we think about learner-centered instruction. And so anytime you talk to an L&D professional, ideally, in an ideal world, when we're designing something, the learner is at the center of everything that we do. The learner is at our focal point. And so I get really excited about the possibilities of ways in which we can enhance that learning experience through adaptive learning and personalized learning. We've continued to see trends changing over the last 20 years in terms of what workplace learning looks like. We saw a big adjustment after the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's not going to be changing. If anything, we're starting to see more organizations are turning to e-learning and looking at different ways they can leverage learning management systems to support workplace learning. And so what I think is really exciting is that if we have these opportunities where we can personalize those learning modules and we can create training more efficiently, and that's customized and relevant to our employees and to our learning audiences, that's going to be a really powerful tool for personalized learning, but also engaging our employees, engaging our learners, and hopefully impacting their performance.
Jill, can we drill down a little bit? We had a couple of people ask about if we could talk a little bit more about AI and using AI for assessments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, some of the things that we're starting to see right now is we're seeing a lot of L&D professionals are using content, or they're inputting content and they're generating quiz questions as opposed to having to try and come up with all of those on their own. So they have opportunities where they can do that. We're starting to see, if you think about just Bloom's taxonomy, if you were looking at, a lot of those basic recall questions or coming up with some different activities, especially if you're engaged in instructor-led trainings, you can input that data and different activities are being generated. Of course, I do think we still need to rely on our L&D professionals to have that critical eye to look at what makes the most sense for the purpose of that training and in the particular organization or industry you're designing for. But it's definitely helping, I think, with generating some variety of learning experiences.
I think the really cool thing too is, like Jill's saying, you could go to ChatGPT and you could upload a doc and ask it to generate a quiz, and it does a really good job of that. I noticed on some of the chat, which is definitely something we're going to talk about today. The thing with that is you have to be very careful around your IP, around that, and making sure you're not, kind of donating something to the worldwide, knowledge base on that. And I think what you're starting to see happen, vendors like Litmus are adding AI in there. So let's say if you already have a course, that's in the library, you can just, instead of going in the assessment tool and creating kind of quizzes by hand, you can just go, hey, I want to create a quiz. And it creates a quiz right there in the application for you. And then, the advantage of that is it's all done in that environment. Your data is protected, your IP is protected, and it's not something you have to worry about. So I think, again, like we talked about accelerating AI on those prior slides, I think as we go into the next year or two, you're going to see a lot of the learning platforms continuing to go through the platforms and adding in capabilities like that. And then the benefit for, the people creating the content, we all know how hard it is to get a quiz right. Like, do you make it too easy? Do you make it too hard? The AI is just so much better at doing that. And if it can just automate creating the assessment in the learning platform where you're not having to copy and paste, like that's even better.
Yeah, Jennifer shared that they're using it to get started with training evaluations tied to specific skill systems and following the Kirkpatrick method. And it's not a final product, they're just getting started, but it's a good start. And I think those are the kind of things that are really important to start experimenting with and taking a crack at and then iterating over time. I think that's great. Any other thoughts here before we move on? Okay, so we did some research specifically for the webinar here, and we asked people about how important each of the following AI powered features are in an LMS. So we wanted to share a little bit of that with you. And Jill and Tommy can give their take on it. So the most popular is automated course content creation, which we touched on, followed closely by automated reminders and notifications, adaptive content delivery based on learner progress. We talked about that. Personalized learning recommendations, content summarization and key point extraction. I won't read through everything, but you can see that there's a decent percentage of organizations, more than half see all of these things as important in an LMS. So what's your reaction when you see this kind of data? Tommy, Jill.
I mean, I think it sort of fits the trend we were talking about before. You look in here, there's something for everyone. Content creation. That's going to help the people that are creating content. In theory, if you get more efficient at creating content and you can create it quicker, you can create more content. I've never worked at a place or heard a place or a customer that said, hey, we have plenty of content. Most people are kind of content starved. And so that goes to that problem. That also could turn, people like me, who are not instructional designers, but managers, into maybe creating content and being citizen content, creators in a company, because it's not so hard. The tool helps them do it. I think, focusing on the learner again is important, solving these problems where you're kind of, giving them the content they need based upon their progress or based upon what you know about that learner, and recommending, other courses that would be pertinent to them is interesting. And so again, it's just encouraging to me to see all the things that people think are important are really things that kind of go across all the roles in L&D.
Mhm. I also think too, is we see when you look at adaptive content delivery based on learner progress, as we continue to accumulate more data on our learners, I think that's where we're also going to be able to see different ways in which AI can be leveraged to personalize that content. I sometimes think of like a choose your own adventure book, right? From 20, 30 years ago, where we'll be able to customize the content specific to particular job functions or interests or career goals. And I also think as that continues to evolve, we'll start to see more with these intelligent tutoring systems or virtual AI teaching assistants. We're starting to see AI assistants with helping learners sift through catalogs and identify appropriate training and content. And I think as we continue to create these learner profiles or really understand who our learners are, we'll be able to start leveraging things like AI teaching assistants to kind of be that guide on the side as they're going through that learning experience. I see potential, particularly like if you have a learner that's struggling with something, you may have a training module. There's some questions embedded in the middle of it, just to kind of see, are they following along, and to actively engage them. Well, if someone gets something wrong, I could see that virtual AI teaching assistant popping up and perhaps getting some additional information from that learner on what are they struggling with, what is it that they might need to go back and review and focus in on. And all of that is great data that can then be sent to your L&D team within your organization. It might be information that's needed for your talent development or your HR professionals, to really look at ways that you can support your learners and your employees within your organizations.
Before we move on to mitigation, we've got a couple of folks who are interested in whether the AI quiz generation can create questions with hotspots and images. Can either of you talk to that?
It's getting pretty close. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the next year, yes, it can do all of that. Like, it can do it separately. Certainly AI can generate images, it can generate questions. The hotspots, maybe the more tricky part. But like, if y'all have played around with the new iterate Strawberry is what they call it, of ChatGPT, it's multimodal. That's what they call it when you can kind of do multiple things at once. It's multimodal functionality, and doing complex reasoning is like another level. And that just got released here in the past few days. And so I think as you see vendors like Litmus start to look at technologies like that and embrace it, you'll see those capabilities, start to show up in the systems.
Before we move on, and I guess we'll be probably talking about this in the mitigation piece, but Rebecca points out that the plagiarism detection could be pretty interesting for content developers as well, with the use of GenAI for content creation. And just as an aside, we create a lot of content, and we use a plagiarism detection device for everything we do. Sometimes there's so much out there that we draw from in our research. We want to obviously make sure that we're not plagiarizing anything. So it used to be really hard to figure that out, but now you've got these detection tools, and we run everything by it. And I think that should be kind of a go-to for everybody as you generate this kind of content.
Yeah, I think that's another kind of category that AI is really great at, is just sort of quality control, whether it's plagiarism. Let's say you have course standards and you want to determine if like the course you built matches the course standard. You used to have to go review it. Now AI can do that pretty easily. Like the accessibility standards, is it accessible to folks? If you did the translations manually, are the translations correct? There's so many things that when you think about like the quality of the content that AI can do for you.
Okay, we've got some other comments and questions. I'm going to move on so we get through everything, and we'll be able to handle some of these other things toward the end. So we've begun to talk about mitigating risks already, and we'll dig into it a little bit deeper here. This graphic is also from the survey we did specifically for this webinar, and it's ranking the level of concern regarding integration of AI into the LMS. And so these percentages represent respondents who said they're very or somewhat concerned. And at the top of the list is the cost and complexity of implementation, followed by ethical considerations and bias in AI algorithms. All of these are pretty high. Data privacy and security, which we touched on, potential misuse. And then, interestingly, only 51% are worried, heavily concerned about loss of human touch and learning. And when we did a question similar to this toward the beginning of the introduction of AI, that was up around like 80%, 85%. And so now it's only 51%, but it's going to be interesting to see how these things change over time.
And I do think that 51% will go up. I'm not surprised that emphasis right now is on that 87% with cost and complexity, because I think a lot of organizations are really trying to determine what is that return on investment if they're going to move forward with integrating AI into their practices. I think I'm going to predict that 51% is going to go up tremendously. Probably I'm going to say in the next 2 to 3 years, because I think as we see more and more organizations and companies relying on generative AI for content creation, I think we're going to start seeing more demands from our learners. If it's not relevant to what they need and it's not customized for the things that they're supposed to be addressing through training, I think our learners and our employees are going to start speaking out. One of the things that we need to be mindful of, as I know there's a lot of L&D professionals attending this webinar today, is that our learners are not going to care if content was generated by AI. They're going to care, is it relevant? Is it useful? Is it helping them? And so I think it's really important too, that as we're looking at generative AI to help support L&D practices and to help create content, that we still have L&D professionals really taking that critical eye to make sure, is this meeting its intended purpose? And so I think that if there are any organizations where they're relying 100% on generative AI tools to create everything, and they're not really screening through stuff, the learners are going to figure it out, and they're going to let you know that it's just not working. And so I think we'll continue to see calls for that human touch. I think we're going to continue to see more organizations demanding the adaptive and personalized learning, especially as we continue to see more research being done on it, more use cases, and more people adopting those types of instructional strategies for L&D in the workplace.
I think when you look at some of these other ones, just on the cost and complexity, I see a lot of people kind of referencing ChatGPT. I think that's where the cost and complexity kind of comes up, because yeah, you can take ChatGPT and do all kinds of with hots we were talking about, maybe plagiarism, but you as a company are having to figure out how to do that. My advice would be lean on a vendor. Pick a vendor. Like somebody mentioned Grammarly. For plagiarism. Or Litmus. For generating content. Pick a vendor that's kind of in that space, that's kind of already solved those problems. I think what you'll see when you do that is that the cost and complexity of implementing isn't going to be high, because it's kind of built into the tools that they already use. So if you already use Grammarly to check your documents, it's just clicking a button to go check for plagiarism, like no extra cost and no extra implementation. And the same thing like Litmus, if you use our content authoring tool to create, content, like AI is just in there. It's a little button that you click to generate, content. And so you'll see the cost and complexity a lot lower when you do that, versus you just try to go do everything yourself. Then it's going to get costly.
Okay, we've still got a lot to get to, and a lot of people have raised issues about risks and concerns. And so let's drill down a little bit here for the next 5 minutes or so on mitigating risks.
I think, kind of along that same line is, when you go out there and you try to figure out how to use ChatGPT or Copilot or any kind of these generic AI tools to do stuff, you also have risk not only around cost and complexity, you have risk around IP. You have to go look at, well, what are they going to do with my content? Which license do I need to get where my IP that I'm, uploading, into ChatGPT, is protected? Are they memorizing my prompts? Are my prompts making it smarter? And is another company benefiting off of my use of it? Does it remember me? I'm in the EU, and like is right to be forgotten, kind of part of that. And so I think by kind of picking a vendor, for the specific thing that you're doing, what you should see is that they've handled all that for you. You need to ask the hard questions. Is my IP shared across other customers? And make sure it's a hard no. Do you keep it as secure as my other data? You need a hard yes. For privacy, right to be forgotten is important. Hard yes. But I think you'll notice with vendors, most of them are solving, those problems. And then the other thing when you do that is you need to have policies, right? The last thing you want is, kind of every department and every group or every content developer, to kind of go off and start picking, the tools they want without any kind of level of governance. And so certainly having those policies defined and working, across the company with multiple departments to get those policies defined is very important, to keep everyone aligned to it. I think the other two I'll mention, and I'll let Jill chime in, is just like the bias. I think the way you have to think about AI's biases and the ethical use of AI, you almost have to think of it as like a human. Humans have biases. Humans, unfortunately, sometimes do unethical things. And like, what are the protections and policies and procedures that you do to mitigate those risks? And I think those are going to be very applicable to AI. And so like Jill said before, like, I don't think anybody's just going to let AI generate a bunch of content and send it to learners, right? Why? Because the content probably isn't going to be that good if that happens, but it could have biases in it. So you're going to have to go through a review process, for AI generated content, just like you do, or you should do, for content that's generated by humans as well. And so again, it's important to define what those policies are, define what those workflows are, and collaborate across departments to make sure everybody knows what those policies are and are following the policies.
I mean, I would, in the interest of time, I would agree with everything that Tommy said. And I also think another way we can mitigate risk is just to kind of scale our efforts right now. This is, again, we're in this new phase with AI. And so it doesn't mean that we have to adopt AI across everything. It's, trying to work some of these kinks out, especially depending on if you're an organization and you're a little bit more hesitant and you're trying to figure out what those workflows are. You're trying to determine what are those limitations, or what are the consequences associated with some of those limitations. I think being able to do some pilot testing and experimenting on what it might look like, or how it might help, or perhaps there might pose some new challenges in terms of workflows. I think it's important to scale these efforts. You can always, continue to make modifications along the way.
We're getting a couple of comments about governance and collaboration and how that can guard against some of the issues. And we're actually, I think, going to touch a little bit more on that in this next section, which is the path to success. But I think that we definitely want to follow up on the governance and collaboration before we wrap up here. So now let's talk about, how we can be more successful going forward and get the most out of it. Part of the solution, obviously, is upskilling and reskilling for the learning team. And just real quickly, because I want to delve into the details more, but we did do a survey question on this, and this is how people ranked the different. We gave them 4 priorities for training in terms of using AI features in the LMS, and the top ranking was online tutorials and documentation, followed by regularly scheduled workshops and webinars, comprehensive training program, and then one-on-one support. And I think all of that's good, but I think as we're going to talk about it on the next slide, I think there's a lot more collaboration that can go on and really trying to make people successful than just formal learning. So Jill and Tommy, let's get into some of the key questions that you guys think are important when determining how AI should be used.
Well, I mean, if we look at the first 2 bullet points here, what areas do we want to improve in our L&D strategy, and what challenges are we facing with content creation? Even just kind of doing like a journey map, that you would typically do, even with, when you're thinking about customer service or trying to map out what they're, how they're interacting with your product or services. I think it's looking at what are those pain points and challenges. What are those challenges that no matter, anytime you're designing a course, what, is someone on your team saying, oh, we can't get to this yet, or we're struggling with this, we need more time. I think looking at different areas that are causing some hiccups within your L&D process, looking at what are some challenges that learners keep communicating when they're providing feedback on content. I think those are those really nice places you can start going, and then you can kind of start exploring, are there ways that we can leverage generative AI to help mitigate some of those pain points for our learners.
I'm beating a drum. I would look at the vendors you're using, because my hunch is they are doing AI. I saw someone in the chat said they were working with ADP on their AI, and so chances are your vendor is doing that. If your vendor isn't doing that, well, you might want to look at some other vendors that are in that industry. And I think what you'll notice is they'll have some things already implemented. So for example, at Litmus, we have an AI assistant, we have AI personalization playlist for learners, we have AI content creation. And I think those then give you very easily, if you're using a vendor, like a quick place to get started, with some of the things that Jill was talking about.
And I think one of the things that we've learned in talking to probably a couple of hundred organizations over the course of this is in terms of who should be involved in all these discussions. I would, and you guys can weigh in, I think you should cast as wide a net as possible in terms of getting people involved. I've talked to a couple of organizations who have had a lot of success with doing this and learning early on. And the best thing they said they did was pull in everybody, learners, legal, IT, anybody who could have any influence or any point of view. They just took a really collegial and collaborative approach of determining how they should get started, what their use cases should be. And they found that they got huge buy-in, and it also had the additional effect of knocking down a lot of traditional silos that have always been there. And what a perfect time to begin to build more collaboration and knock down silos than dealing with such a huge thing as AI. So I would just throw that out there.
Yeah,
I think you'll see the process will go much quicker when you involve those people up front versus you get to the end like, hey, we picked something. This is what we're going to go do. And then the security guy goes, well, I need to see and make sure that our data is being secure. The privacy person, is going to check that, and the legal person is going to check for IP. And those things will slow you down versus, involving them up front. Like the process should go much faster.
And I think casting that wide net and involving them early on in these discussions, it just helps to ensure you've got a strong infrastructure in place to support your efforts along the way.
As Adrian points out in the chat, they just went through a use case meetings throughout the organization, and 3 were selected, and they'll be getting started soon. One of them is not learning, but they'll be involved in the training, and they're part of the whole discussion. So that is something that could happen. It might not be learning that's in the initial investigation or experimentation phase, but if you're involved in it, you'll be in a good position to continue to weigh in and build relationships, and learning will get their turn. So I think thanks for sharing that. So let's we've got about 9 minutes left. We want to feel free to drop in any other questions or comments. We'll touch on those at the end. But first, just we've had a pretty good discussion, I think, some great input. What are some key takeaways that you want to leave everyone with? We'll start with Tommy and then Jill.
I think that my key takeaway is definitely use it on your personal side. Some of those stats to me were way too low. There's lots of things you can use it for on the personal side. I saw somebody was getting it to interpret healthcare results. I'd be careful of that, but it is interesting to see what it says, and it's probably more accurate than a Google search. So play with it on your personal side. Definitely. I think, again, the second one that I've kind of sprinkled throughout the things I've talked about is look to your L&D vendors that you're using today. Chances are they are using AI, and you just using that capability within your existing toolkit is going to be a much cheaper, quicker, easier way to get done, because it's not another vendor. It's somebody hopefully you already trust and you've got a track record with, to get that done. And I think when you go and you look at your existing vendor who have these things, just look to get started. I don't know if I would bowl the ocean and go, oh, we're going to use all the AI capabilities you have. So if they have, AI assistant, or AI content creation, just maybe get one instructional designer using their AI, content creation tool. So I think that the key thing is, just try to get started, try to do something, use your existing vendors. And I think all those things are just going to kind of get the engines running and likely give you more ideas and more experience as far as how you can sort of take it from small scale to truly something you could roll out across your organization.
Jill?
Yeah, I think one of my key takeaways is that AI is here, whether we like it or not, or whether we want to adopt it or not. And so I think it's really important that as L&D professionals, we're exploring and we're experimenting, just as Tommy said. I do think, though, we want to make sure we're not losing the human-centeredness that's inherent in instructional design and learning. So I think as we're engaging with AI and trying new things, that we're still keeping our learners as that focal point in everything that we're doing. But I think it's, being open to exploring and trying to do things a little bit differently. And I think trying to think outside the box with content creation, thinking outside the box with different ways we might be able to leverage it for assessment moving forward. I think I think we're really just scratching the surface, even with all the stuff that's come out in this last year and a half. I'm really excited to see what happens, a year and a half from today, with all the different things that we're doing. But I think along the way, as we're trying new things, don't be afraid to test things out. Don't be afraid to get feedback on it. I think feedback's going to be really key here, and getting feedback from different stakeholders as you're experimenting with different ways you might be able to adopt it into your organizational strategy.
I want to ask you one more poll question here before everybody starts dropping off, but just one more thing. It hasn't really come up today, but I get a lot. Well, what if there's an AI bubble? What if the bubble bursts and we go, everything drops off? I just don't see that happening in any way. I think we're going to keep moving forward, like Tommy and Jill have said, and I think we need to all be ready. So that kind of leads us to our last question, and that's after this webinar, what are the steps that you're going to take? What's the first action you plan on taking regarding generative AI? Is it more research or discussing development and implementation more with your team? Experiment with AI tools yourself? Start developing a GenAI strategy for your organization? All of the above, if you're going to do all that, or if you want to indicate you may do something else, you can throw something in the chat real quick. So what's your primary or first actions you plan to take regarding generative AI? I think that's a good way to kind of end here and see what people plan to do now that they've been talking about this a little bit. So Shay, go ahead and see what folks say. So only 26% saying all the above. The biggest individual choice is experiment with AI tools myself. And then a fairly close second is researching more on my own. I think both of those are really good steps to take. Okay, before people start dropping off, we want to do our raffle. So Shay, why don't you let us know who the raffle winner is, and then we'll handle a couple of questions before we sign off.
Absolutely. Thank you, Claude. Congratulations to you, Catherine Brown, on winning today's prize, a $100 Amazon gift card. We will be sending you an e-card shortly to celebrate your win. Congrats. Claude, back over to you.
Thanks. So we handled quite a few questions and comments along the way, but maybe we can take a couple quick ones. And I had one. Shoot. Here's one. Where is a really good place to start about learning more about AI and how it can benefit me and my organization? I think he's looking more than just doing research. Where would be the best place specifically to go if you could give advice?
I think there's some great courses out there if you want to learn more about AI. Like if you're using a learning platform, whether it's like LinkedIn Learning or GoOne or Open Sesame or really, Udemy, any of these content providers that you may be using, they likely have a overview to AI or beginners to AI or how to use AI in business that I think are great places to start. And then if you want to get really geeky, you can get in there and learn more about how does all this stuff work. And they have courses on that as well.
And just to add to that, depending on what industry you're in, also looking at what are, how's your industry talking about AI? What's coming up? There's a lot of use cases that are online. If you're looking at AI, and you can enter in your industry, whether it's AI in healthcare, AI in patient education, AI in customer service. So depending on what industry you're working in, I think just seeing how are others in your field or your industry talking about AI, looking at other professional organizations you may be involved with to see how are they talking about it, because it's being talked about so much. It's one of the most popular topics, I think, at any conference, regardless of what the purpose of the conference is. AI is coming up in these conversations, and so I think just kind of just listening to everything that's around you and seeing how are others in your area approaching it or not approaching it, and why.
Yeah, I think we're in an era of experimentation, and nobody has all the answers. Everybody has a lot of good ideas, and so I think it's just a journey that you seek out as many sources of information as you can, and involve as many people in your circle as you can in terms of building and making a case to go forward. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We're at the top of the hour. This has been a great conversation. Thank you, Jill and Tommy. Thanks to Litmos for sponsoring. Especially to all of you who've participated so wonderfully and asked great questions and made comments and added to our discussion. Thanks for taking the time today. I hope it was helpful for you, and good luck to everyone as we move forward in generative AI, and we'll see you soon in a Brandon Hall Group webinar, I hope. Bye-bye.